Hello, this is a presentation to inform you what the Council is considering in Amendment 41 to the Snapper Grouper Fishery Management Plan in the South Atlantic, and it pertains with fishing level specifications and management measures for mutton snapper. This is a scoping presentation. Scoping is something that provides the public with an opportunity to make suggestions before the council has made any decisions. So this is a very early stage of the amendment developing process. So some background on why the council is considering any changes. There was an update to the stock assessment done for mutton snapper in the southeastern U.S., and that stock assessment is CDAR 15A update, and that was done in 2015 and was conducted with data through 2013. The previous amendment for mutton snapper had been done back in 2008. Mutton snapper are considered a single stock extending across the South Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico jurisdictions. And so back in 2011, when the councils were setting up their acceptable biological catches and annual catch limits for all their managed stocks, they split up the ABC between the two councils. And 82% of that acceptable biological catch went to the South Atlantic, and the other 18% went to the Gulf of Mexico. And this was done with a formula that used 50% of the average landings from 1990 through 2008. That's the time period they designated as the historical period for this fishery. And then add to that 50% of average landings from 2006 through 2008. So that's how that split of the ABC was calculated. So the new stock assessment resulted in the following the recommendations you see on your screen. Some of those numbers probably don't mean much to you, but the stock is not overfished and it is not undergoing overfishing. So the council needs to take action to adopt some of the values that you see here on your screen and update old ones from the previous assessment. So the council is looking at revising the maximum sustainable yield, the minimum stock size threshold, and then adopt the new acceptable biological catch that was recommended by the Scientific and Statistical Committee and by the assessment that was approved. So here are the current fishing levels. We have an overfishing level that's 1.5 million pounds. The acceptable biological catch is 926,600 pounds, and this is just for the South Atlantic. The annual catch limit is set at the same level. Then we have the commercial annual catch limit is 157,707 pounds whole weight, and that is 17% of that total ACL. The recreational sector gets 83% of that approximately, and that's 768,893 pounds. And then the annual catch target is set at 669,000 pounds. So this table shows you what is currently in place. Actually, these are the recommendations from the new stock assessment by year from 2016 through 2020. That's how the projections are calculated over a certain time period, and then the council can choose to adopt the whole stream or do it differently. So this is what they're looking at establishing as the acceptable biological catch. So take that number. The old ABC for the South Atlantic that I just told you about is 926,600 pounds, and then the new ABC from the stock assessment would be 567,440 pounds. So it's a good bit lower. And why this is because based on improvements to the modeling approach that was used in the stock assessment, as well as additional years of data, the new stock assessment estimated a smaller adult population compared to the previous assessment, and so therefore the recommendation for the acceptable biological catch, which is the amount of total removals that is sustainable for a population has to be reduced. And so this amendment would, as I said, update all those biological benchmarks and fishing levels based on the new assessment. It would revise the ABC and the annual catch limits, and then also revise or establish recreational and commercial management measures to make sure that the new ACLs are not exceeded. So I'll walk you through the possible list of actions and alternatives. As I said, the Council needs to adopt the new MSY, and so they've done this for several species. As a species becomes assessed to adopt the MSY, they go through this process to where they can just from now on adopt whatever is recommended by the most recent stock assessment, or the SSC. And so you see on the table on your screen what the yield at that fishing rate, F 30% SPR, what the yield is from the new assessment, and that's the level that would be adopted as the maximum sustainable yield for mutton snapper. They're looking at revising the minimum stock size threshold, which is the level below which a stock is considered overfished. So this is the level of biomass. And they're looking at 3 alternatives. These are the similar suite of alternatives that they've considered for other species. Currently, you see that the very top of that table shows you the formula that's used. And for a lot of species that have a low natural mortality, which is that value M that you see on the screen, the Council has opted to set the MSST at 75% of the spawning stock biomass at MSY. And they've done that because when you have low mortality rates, less than 0.25, even small changes in biomass that result from just natural variation or things that are not related to fishing mortality can cause a stock to go between an overfished and a rebuilt condition. And in order to avoid this flip-flopping, then the Council has chosen to set MSST at that level that's under Alternative 3. They've done that with other species, and they're going to consider it for mutton snapper as well. And here's the options for the ACLs and the optimum yield. The current ABC is 926,600 pounds, and then you've got your ACLs based on those allocations that I've already told you about. So the table below shows what's proposed just for 2016. Of course, there's, as I said before, projections out to 2020, but I just put these up on the screen so that you can see what the numbers would look like. And so you are looking at under, let's say, if the Council chooses subalternative 2A, which means to keep the ACL at the same level as the ABC, then your commercial ACL would be 96,578 pounds. And your recreational ACL in numbers would be 114,010 fish. And the recreational ACL in numbers is calculated simply by using the average weight. And I believe for this species we use an average weight of 4.13 pounds to convert that recreational ACL from pounds to numbers. So to give you some perspective, here's the commercial and recreational landings over the last few years. So you have the average on the bottom. So in numbers for the recreational sector, the landings have been on average 112,000 fish, and for the commercial sector, the landings have hovered around 77,000 pounds. And so if you compare that with what's proposed, which is what you see here, for the commercial sector, there doesn't seem to be a need for any reduction in harvest to make sure that the landings don't go above the proposed commercial ACL. But for the recreational sector, it's getting kind of close. The mean landings between 2010 and 2014, as I said, was 112,000 fish, and the proposed ACL for 2016 is 114,000 fish. So there may need to be a reduction in harvest, and so the Council is considering some changes to recreational management measures to make sure that ACL is not exceeded. Another thing that they have to do is to set a recreational annual catch target. You see the current one, which is calculated using something called a percent standard error, which is a measure of precision in the recreational data. And the higher that number is, the less precise the information. So anyway, that is built into the formula to come up with this annual catch target, which is something that can be used to trigger accountability measures. So let's say, you set that as your limit, and if you reach that limit, then that triggers some kind of accountability measure. Our council hasn't chosen to use it in that way, but they still go ahead and set those targets anyway. And so they're looking at a range, setting it at 85% of the recreational ACL, 75% of the recreational ACL, or keeping it using that same formula. Of course, the numbers would change based on whatever they choose as a recreational ACL. And here are some of the things that they would like to get input on. There's been quite a bit of comments that have come from fishermen, law enforcement officers, saying, well, there's really, there needs to be a little bit more restrictions placed on harvest during the spawning season. Mutton snapper aggregate to spawn, and there's concern that there's over-exploitation during the spawning season. And so the council just wants to seek input on how to revise the measures to better protect spawning mutton snapper. And so one of the things they want to do is to delineate what the spawning season would be for regulatory purposes. So they're looking at several options here. Should there be more strict regulations during April through June, April through July, June, July, May, or May through August? And so this would help them tailor their management to the months that are most critical for the biology of this particular species. So right now, the spawning season is just May through June, but there's no additional restrictions except for the commercial sector. So that's one of the things that we're hoping folks are going to have some input on. The next thing is a bag limit revision. Right now, the mutton snapper are included in the 10 snapper aggregate, and there's, as I said, no additional restrictions during May and June. So there's several things that we could consider: retain it in the aggregate, but specify a bag limit in the regular season, so outside of the spawning months, should that bag limit be revised. So they're looking at a range of from 4 to 10 fish per person per day, and that alternative. And then, for the months that are more critical, they're looking at a wider range of things. So 2 fish per person per day, 2 fish per vessel per day, 5 per vessel, 10 per vessel, and 12 per vessel. And the 12 per vessel here is in italics because this is what the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission is seeking input on as their limit. And I should mention that the state of Florida is very interested in issuing compatible regulations with the federal regulations. So we're going to be getting input from the public along with FWC representatives when we take this out for scoping over the next couple of weeks. And I'll tell you about that in just a little bit. And then, okay, there's another alternative. So they're also looking at, maybe it should be retained in the aggregate, but then there should be bag limits specified year-round. And so there's also an option for that, from 2 to 5 fish per person per day, year-round. So that's for the recreational sector. Then for the commercial sector, as I said, there is some restriction of harvest for that sector to 10 fish per day, 10 fish per person per day, or 10 fish per trip, whichever is more restrictive, and sale is allowed. So they're looking at maybe a trip limit during the regular season, so outside of the spawning months, of 300, 400, 500 pounds. And then maybe another trip limit during the spawning months that would be specified not in pounds, but in numbers of fish or in numbers per vessel per day. So this on your screen is the range that we've come up with, mainly to get input from the public. This, as I said earlier, this is not anything that has been decided on. All of these alternatives can change. This is simply what the council is putting out there to see how, what people think about it. So that wraps it up for this amendment. So the timing is, as I said, we're conducting this scoping meetings this month. We have a question and answer webinar that is scheduled for January 21st, so next Thursday at 6 o'clock. I'll be doing this online, and you can register for that webinar on the council's website. There's a link, and it's very easy, so you just listen to the presentation, and then you have a chance to ask questions, and the whole point is to make sure that folks understand why this is being done, and if they have any questions or need anything clarified, then I can address that during the webinar. And then we have scoping meetings, in-person scoping meetings. So we'll be going to several locations throughout the South Atlantic the week of the 25th of January and then the first week of February. And we'll be conducting those meetings in the evenings at various locations, and all that information is on the council's website. When the council meets in March, they're going to be meeting in Georgia. They're going to review those scoping comments and make whatever changes need to be made to the actions and alternatives. They'll give us guidance to proceed with developing the amendment. In June, we'll bring back analyses to the council, and then it's expected they'll approve the amendment then for public hearings. We'll do those hearings in August of this year. The council will review those comments in September, and again, change whatever needs to be changed based on public comment. And then in December, they would approve it for submission for formal review, and regulations would become effective sometime probably in the summer of 2017. So we are requesting comments. You can mail those in. The address is on the scoping document, which you can download from the website. And you can use a fax or email. All that information is on your screen. We're receiving comments until 5 p.m. on February 10th. And you can always contact me. My name is Myra, and you can call me at the number of your screen, or you can send me an email. And as I said, next Thursday, I'll be doing this again, and at that point, you can ask questions. Thank you for your time.